Alrighty, everybody. Hello, hello. Josh here at Mini Painting Studio, and today we're going over a heavily edited down version of me painting Adrasteia Winterthorn, the dungeon dweller of the month. It's taken me a little bit to get to here, but this is about 14 hours worth of cutting and editing and rendering, so it's taken a while, and I've just had a really busy month. So I do apologize if you've been waiting for any type of paint-along stuff, but here it is. So, first thing we're doing here, I've primed her gray just because all the colors are really going to be either lighter, mostly, so I can move up from the middle, down, whatever. You can do white, you can do black. I probably wouldn't do black, but I always like to go for gray. First color that I'm layering in, relatively simple. I'm lightly covering in with orc skin. So you can see I'm really focusing on sort of the edges of the cloak here. The idea that I'm going for is that I want to use the gray sort of as a tint towards the middle of the fabric to sort of help me out begin to tint or shade it. Now, a lot of the stuff that I did on this miniature as well, I changed my mind like a lot, or I stepped away from certain sections for a minute and I'm like, actually I'm gonna go back and change this, or I need to darken this. So you'll see the way that I paint, if you're not familiar with it, I sort of will have an idea in my mind of what I'm doing, and rather than like, okay, I'm gonna start with a darker tan color and just highlight it up, I like to be able to sort of work in between a highlight and a shadow, so try and keep things neutral for as long as I can, so that way, while I'm painting the rest of the miniature, I can adjust certain sections as I need to help them sort of come together. If you don't have orc skin, you can use like a lighter desert stone color. I believe there are also, maybe like fair highlight would work. There are all kinds of different Reaper colors specifically that you could be using to get a very similar tone. But then, what I'm doing next is I'm going to be layering in a goblin skin. So this is also a newer color. And I'm doing it extremely lightly. This is not mixed with the previous color, so I'm really glazing this in around the edge. You can think of what I'm doing now, like putting a frame around the entire skirt, and it'll just kind of help you get those transitions in. Look at that edge of that brush, it's all wiry. But one thing that I am doing though is I'm pushing the brush in the direction that I would like the pigment to sort of taper off and dry on its own. So that always helps out a lot as well. But really right now, I'm just sort of trying to get a feel for the level of either white or ivory or whatever color I'm trying to get out of this. Now, if you see in the final painted version, you know pretty obviously that it changes quite a bit from this, but this is sort of the base from which I'm able to edit it and move it along. Currently the top, right, is more saturated and warmer than the bottom of the skirt until I go through, and really I'm only applying this on the ground. The ground itself is sculpted with green stuff. It's not the best, but I think I ended up making it look pretty okay. So you can see me tapering it in, sort of trying to mix it on top. But really, that's the majority of the sort of color blocking work that I did on the bottom of the skirt itself. So, but if you don't have a goblin skin, you can also use a color similar to probably, I would say, like maybe a rich leather or the oiled leather. You could probably use that just very thin and get a very similar result. And if you don't have those, you could use tanned leather. So sort of like a much richer, warmer skin tone will really help you out. So now what I'm doing is I'm going through, you can really use like any kind of color for this. I might be using ghost white. I don't remember 100%. I know it's not a pure white. You could also use an insanely light skin tone if you have something like that, if you have a really light gray, or you can use white. It doesn't matter. But what I'm doing is I'm essentially testing the contrast here by going through and doing highlights on the edge work, on the ruffles, the wrinkles and creases and everything where it's bunching up on the ground, and then I'm slowly tapering it down along those longer folds that are created vertically on the skirt itself. So you can see me doing that there. Really nothing too crazy. But, so after it's dried, One thing that I did do towards the bottom was I layered in a little bit of gray, just literally white and black mixed in. I always have some white and some black on my palette at all times, just so I can adjust really quickly if I need to for something. So I layered that in a little bit more, and then now I can go back through and try and push highlights one final time. So layering back in those colors, increasing the contrast, and that's it. So moving away from the skirt, I pretty much figured like I'm gonna be dealing with this over and over unless I just say it's done. So now I'm just layering in, I believe this is Succubus Kiss. Could be wrong, but it is a just deeper purpley red color, but it also isn't covering very well for me, so I'll probably have to find something that works better. I do believe it is Succubus Kiss though. I have Succubus Kiss in front of me right now, and I think it is also literally right there by my left hand. So I did keep the paint separated so I could try and remember here. So I did this first coat, and I'm like, this isn't really the color that I would want necessarily, so I'm gonna have to figure out if I need to do 2 coats, or if I need to darken it, or whatever. But I do know I want it to be red on the interior portion of the cloak itself. So, or not even a red, but just a nice warm sort of purpley dark color. So that was the idea there at least. Now I believe the next thing I'm gonna do is just literally shoot it down completely. So I'm either adding like an ebony flesh or a black directly to the Succubus Kiss color, and boom. You can see right there, now I'm pushing in a much darker color. And it is actually probably like direct black. I don't think that was the ebony tone there. I did use that color on the cape though. But so you can see me pushing the pigment towards the inside. You can see, right, like I apply it overall, and then I push the edge of the brush into the crease. And that way I'm able to push that pigment in there to try and force it to dry in that direction, and that's what makes it so great. But that's all I'm doing. I'm trying to darken it up, and then obviously that means I'm gonna have to go back and highlight it out on the edges, but that's not really that hard. We already have the paint on the palette. It's not that big of a deal. Now all of this, obviously, like this is real-time speed painting, and then I've edited it to where it speeds up in portions, and then I cut other portions out. This total paint job itself was maybe about 4 or 5 hours, and I cut it down to like 3 hours, and then I edited that, sped it up, cut it up, and this is what we got. So you're missing like drying time essentially, or if I took a break or things like that. And you may notice me talking a little bit in the corner of the screen with my face. I did have this streamed to my Patreon group as well, so they were kind of hanging out off and on. I was doing it at a weird time, right, like an all-day stream, so they were able to pop in and kind of check it out here and there, but and then I was also talking to some friends just on Discord, hanging out, having a good time. So, so now I'm layering in the ebony flesh, I forget what it is, but it's the darkest skin tone that Reaper makes, I'm pretty sure. And I'm applying it a little bit watered down. One reason I like using gray too, you can actually get highlight out of it that doesn't create a pastel color. So if you prime white and you do a wash or a very thin layer of a color on top of that, you will get those ridges showing underneath like a highlight, but it sometimes will create a pastel color or a much lighter color that doesn't look natural that you can build on top of. So one reason I like gray, right, on a cape or something like that, I can apply it a lot thinner and with one coat, and I will get a natural highlight underneath that will literally show me. It's like paint by numbers, right? I'm able to go, oh yeah, all right, I apply my highlight color here because that's where the primer is showing through. So as I'm waiting for the cape to dry, threw a little bit of gray as a wash consistency on the base as well. And then I think I'm about to, okay, yeah. So now I'm sort of shading in darker areas now that it's dry with a direct black. As that dries, I'm playing around with highlights again here on the front of the skirt. Since it's so much darker around it, I need to increase the contrast. Now, if I had any semblance of a plan in my head before I got started with this, then maybe I would have known to just push these colors from the beginning, but the way that I paint, right, I try and keep everything cohesive, and so that's sort of why I end up painting in this way. So it's a little bit different than You know, if I was trying to make a painting tutorial video, then I wouldn't do it this way. I would be like, we're gonna paint the skirt here and it's done, right? And then we'd move on. But when I paint, which I thought would be more beneficial for people to see, the direct paint job, right, that they were using to show off the miniature, that it would be more beneficial. So while I do kind of hop, skip, and jump around all over the place, there is usually a reason behind it. But so here I am just highlighting it up. I'm using more of that ghost white mixed in, probably with some of the desert stone color, or maybe just white, but I'm trying to not make it pure white, but rather sort of blend in with those sort of warmer hues that we have. But you can see now the play that we've created by adding that succubus kiss in the really dark shade on the interior portion of the cloak. It's really bringing out that gray hue that we had coming through underneath from the primer. So by doing that, it's creating a nice tonal shift. We have sort of like a bluish tone, a neutral tone on the inside, that middle portion, like where her knees and shins would be. Then it goes to that very bright white highlight, right? Where it all starts bunching down on the ground. And then we have that nice warm skin tone color that, let's see, what were we using? The goblin skin, what is it, right? Or kobold skin, whatever. I believe goblin skin. Creates that really warm contrast, and then highlighting on top of that. I think I play with the skirt a little bit more, but I think it's done right there. I think that's like the final version of it, other than maybe some cleanup. So the cloak is good to go. I believe I will start, if my memory serves me correctly, highlighting up edges and stuff on the cape, right? Yeah, so there we go. What I'm mixing there is some purple. It doesn't really matter what purple you use because I mixed it so much with black and a little bit of gray. I want it to be really neutral and look like it's not like a crushed velvet, but like a not a real fancy material. And I don't also want it to be really reflective, like the front of the skirt. The skirt itself, right, is reflecting really, really bright. It sort of looks like it's sheer a little bit, maybe satiny, I don't know, whatever. But the back of the cape, completely different. So that's what we're doing here. There are all kinds of purples you could use. Reaper makes some really cool purples, but I'm pretty sure I was using something closer to. Let me look at my purple section here and all of my paints. Actually, really, like I said, any purple will work for you because it was mixed with some gray, but I believe precisely it was Imperial Purple. There you go. So now what I'm layering in is a rust brown to create the red cowl. So when I was talking to Ron, his inspiration that he had for me was to make her very classical, very classic vampire. So that would mean like black, red, white, gray, right? Very simple scheme like that. So the trick that I wanted to pull off was to try and push the colors a lot more than just that, right? So I didn't want to use those colors necessarily in highlights or base coats. So same way I did purple on the cape to make it look black, we started with the rust brown on the cowl. Then what I'm doing here is I'm literally I made a wash, just really watered down, of a direct red, so just straight up red, put that over that, and it gives us a nice shade on top of that. Then it's just a game of layering reds. Reds in general, if you're using Reaper, I think I'm literally just layering the red, and then I may move up to more of like one of the sort of orangey reds that they have, like the I think it's fiery orange, I don't remember exactly. But that's pretty much as far as I took it. Like even a really thin layer of something like a volcanic orange will work for you as well. You can tell I'm really in the throes of painting here because I haven't looked up at my secondary monitor to realize, oh right, I'm not actually in the camera's view here. But so it's sort of a play between using a brown to get you the basis, and I think the reason why I decided to use that rust brown color instead of a red as the base, it just changes the overall hue and vibe really of that color. Now you probably could achieve the same thing by just painting it red, doing like a black wash or something, I don't know. You could do something different, obviously. There's a million ways to paint a mini, but that's sort of what I did. And the reason too, right, that rust brown is similar to the skin color that we applied at the top of the cloak. So really in my head, while I was working, I was like, well, maybe this will make sense, you know? Maybe it won't, I don't know, but like I said, I always just fish around and feel around while I'm working on a mini. Oh, and totally cut this out, sorry. I did a light purple wash over the skin with that same Imperial Purple, like very, 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 very light wash so that we get some tone on there. Now what I'm doing is just doing a really watered down black on top of the hair, so that way that gray dries, showing through the black, and boom, we have immediate highlights on the hair. But obviously we're gonna have to go back and edit the hair itself, add some more highlight and everything like that. I do love the hair on this miniature though, because, well, I don't know, I'm sort of 50-50. Now, Bobby Jackson, amazing sculptor, all respects due, so don't get me wrong with what I'm saying. But it's interesting that there are these very unique individual strands of hair. Normally I don't like that, but for this miniature it made sense because it allowed me to do that sort of classic, like, villainy streak of white pretty easily, right? Because it was sculpted on there. You can do it a bunch of different ways, but it makes it a lot easier to paint. So now what I'm doing, I'm taking that same ghost white color, and I'm spending like the next hour, I think hour and a half or something stupid like that, just forever, slowly layering it into the face and trying to push it up. The sculpt was really interesting too, for those of you that have it, or if you've painted it. I've seen some people paint it as well. I was kind of confused by the eyes. Now, I may be blind and just not capable of comprehending what I was looking at, but I was assuming her body is turning to the left, she's glancing to the left, and she's starting to turn her head to the left. That's how I painted them. I believe the left eye, or if we're viewing it from the front, the eye that's on the right-hand side, that one is, I think, if I looked at the mini correctly, it's partially obscured by a strand of hair. So that was difficult for me. I think I pulled it off pretty well. At the end of the video, you'll see a picture of the miniature itself, painted. But that was difficult for me. You know, painting eyes, half the time I don't do it, literally. Like, it's one of those things, you can do an amazing paint job and do the eyes incorrectly, and your amazing paint job looks terrible. You can do a terrible paint job, right? Paint some eyes that look bad, and now it looks really bad. So a lot of the times, even with commission work, I just shade stuff to where I may highlight an eyeball, but I'm not doing irises or anything like that. But when I'm doing stuff that's like a production picture or just really trying to do a really, really good job, I will do the eyes, and they are difficult. It never gets easy for me. Sort of like painting skin is something that still daunts me. I feel like I do a good job at it, but it just takes a while, and you have to be patient. So that's all I'm doing here. There's literally no trick. I'm just layering over and over and over and over and over and over all the highlights on the skin that I want. And it only is as dark, the contrast that's there is only as dark as that Imperial Purple wash that I applied originally. So that on top of the gray, it made it relatively dim and dull, but it's creating a subtle enough contrast with that super bright light color that we're using for the skin to work correctly. I could have probably pushed it darker, but I don't think it really would have pulled off that sort of pale, you know, undead vampiress skin complexion that I was going for. So, but yeah, just pulling all those details out. I threw some red on the lips. I actually repainted the lips over and over and over, like so many times, and I was trying to finish out the miniature. I couldn't really tell if she had an upper lip or not, or if she did, if I was so dumb that I couldn't figure out how to do the part of the lip and then the skin between the lip and the nose. I couldn't really figure it out. So I just sort of kept painting the lips and then trying to clean them up. So where we're at now, the only thing that I've done is just layer in some of that same rust brown color into the cracks of the ground. I like heavily weathered those over and over to get them to where I wanted, but I always just start layering in different browns. Here what I'm doing is I'm layering a gray. Now this gray isn't any like direct Reaper gray. I literally mixed it with colors I already had out on the palette, so you can use any gray you want, just keep it relatively dull. It shouldn't be competing with the skin tone, and as long as you keep that in mind, you're good. But like I was sort of talking about this style of hair, sometimes depending on the hairstyle, I really don't like it, but since this is also a middle part, it makes it much easier to paint, and it looks realistic. So you can see all I had to do was highlight it up once, and then I did one nice little streak of white, and that's literally it for the hair. Really, really simple, really, really effective, and I think it looks really, really nice. So that's really pretty much it. And then really the last things that I need to address on the miniature are the row of either like beads or adornment or embellishment that goes across different portions of the top part of her dress, whether it's a corset or something like that. Oh, I did wash a little bit of brown, the rust brown, into the hair too. It dried so much that I don't think you can even see it in the final photo, but I did just notice I threw it on there. But, so really that's the last thing I need to mess with. Here you can see I'm starting to color block in and really roughly try and change the texture of the stones underneath. So I'm just dip, 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 stipple, 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 all over the place. I'm not really, it's kind of weird. Like, I'm okay at sculpting certain things in green stuff, but when it comes to, like, doing a stone texture, your boy gotta paint it on himself. I can't really sculpt it. Like, I really do have to just do an implied highlight or an implied texture with the brush itself. And I think it turned out pretty great. I probably would have gone back and done more of those, like, little scratches across the surface, but again, the focus isn't on this base, right? The focus was on the cool miniature, so it is what it is. And I did make sure to try and make it off-center so that it looked a little bit more natural, right? Like, you'll notice that she's not centered on the squares or anything like that itself. So, trying to keep that in mind when I sculpted it. Obviously, you can base her however you would like. I have seen some people on the Reaper Facebook group that have done a shockingly impressive job sculpting it almost exactly the same way that I did, and that was really, really impressive. And I've seen some people too, actually, well, it's kind of funny, the coloring on the Reaper photo is a little bit different, but I've seen people literally knock those same colors out of the park. So, and I know I've commented on a few people's photos that have done it, and they did a great job. So, really impressed with that. The only other thing that I did was then do a really heavy gray wash on top of the stone, which you can see now that just killed most of those highlights and then tied everything together. So the last thing that I'm working on, like I said, is the dress itself. The dress itself is a, I believe, a snow shadow. So you can use snow shadow here. On the dress too, I did a wash before this of that same imperial purple. So literally the skin and the dress have the exact same starting point of shadow and hue, which then just allows me to use a separate color to change the look of it completely. That separate color, instead of doing ghost white like we did on the skin, I'm just using snow shadow. So it's a much bluer and not as bright color, but it should still work in terms of creating the same level of contrast as the skin, which then will transition down into the subtle contrast that we have on the top of her skirt, which then flows into a much deeper and more neutral contrast with the bottom of the skirt, which ties into the base, which ties into the inside of her cloak, the back of her cloak. You get it. You're trying to create a story here that your eyes follow on the miniature, so that's what we're doing. Now, I will say, just like the eyeballs, painting the little dots that sort of follow the portions of the cloak was pretty difficult. But I think I just, like, the cast of my mini, some parts were really raised out, and then some weren't as much, which just the way that I paint made it a little bit more difficult. But, you know, if you're just applying a wash on top of it or whatever, it's going to be fine. And really, you probably won't notice it at all. There's a texture around the cowl as well that I completely ignored. Just, I saw that it was there, and I was like, we're not doing that. I'm just going to paint around it. So that's what I did. And I do that frequently too with stuff. Like, again, Bobby, sorry, I did ignore it, but sometimes there's stuff on sculpts that I'm like, well, that's gonna just probably be difficult for me or make me, you know, mess up or something. So sometimes if I can get around it, I will. But all in all, that's all this was. I mean, you're looking at maybe 2, 4, 6, 8 colors used total, with black and white mixed in. So not a lot of colors technically. If you look at the colors just like sort of in a gestalt view on the miniature, we've got that sort of tannish grayish color for the skirt, the white on the bodice or the shirt, whatever that is, and then the red and the black. So really, like, in air quotes, maybe 5 colors on the miniature, but paint wise, definitely about 8 Reaper paints: Succubus Kiss, Imperial Purple, Rust Brown, the Goblin Skin, some kind of rich leather if you don't have the Goblin Skin, or in between, a Snow Shadow, Ghost White, and that's pretty much it, right? And black and white. So really not a lot of stuff, but definitely enough to make her work. And then I do believe the way that I did the edges, that's what I'm working on now, are those little pearls or whatever that sort of follow her like lace glove gauntlets, I guess, or whatever they actually are. And then other parts on the dress, I just did the side of the brush to actually get it to hit and do the highlight. I always like to do that instead of doing direct dotting on every single thing, especially if it's small like that, because you will mess up. I mean, I will mess up for sure, because I'm a giant, clumsy painter. But I always suggest people do it that way. And especially, too, if your brush isn't like a needle point, then it's frustrating and difficult, and you have to paint over it and whatever. So, but that was really it. That was like the last step that I was doing, was figuring out how I wanted to layer those colors in. And I believe I'm not doing any other color on those dots than, I think I did jump up to the Ghost White. So they're a little bit brighter, but there's also the contrast around all of them from the wash. So it is what it is. Nothing too insane. And then really the rest of the time I spent on this mini was just sort of cleaning up. Like, really what I did was I took a picture of it, and then I saw things I needed to clean, and then I went and cleaned them up, right? That's kind of the best way to move if you actually are worrying about photographing a mini or something like that, is when you think you're done, take an up-close picture, look at the up-close picture in horror, realize that you've made a bunch of mistakes or that it looks gross, and then go back and try and make it look not gross. That's sort of my method that I try and follow. But all in all, again, this is a very awesome, easy sculpt to paint, which is great. So it's really up to you how you want to try and push it. I really do think it's one of my favorite sculpts in terms of clothing now. I absolutely love the way that Bobby did the folds and all of that action that's happening on the bottom and on the bottom of the cloak. I just love it. So here you can see what it actually looks like, not completely blown out by my cameras and lighting. Oh, let me go ahead and hide this. Boop. Hiding the sponsors. We don't need that in the video. So you can see here, she's turning, she's glancing to the left. You can see the subtle shadows on the clothing. You can see the purpley skin tone, the hair, all the color transition that we got out of the cloak, or not the cloak, but the skirt. And everything else involved. So I love the sculpt. Again, I think it's like my favorite use of cloth that I've seen recently, or ever probably, on a Reaper Mini. And I love it. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you can share the pictures that you painted. Definitely check out my live streams Tuesday through Friday. There's a Patreon stream every Monday. If you're interested in that, check out patreon.com/minipaintingstudio. We do classes every single month. I mail out physical products that I produce to the patrons, and all of your support helps me feed my gigantic monster of a cat, Arthur. I appreciate you. I love you. I love Reaper. I hope you have an awesome time painting.